All right. So, I wanted to welcome you to the American Southwest. And I'm wearing here a cowboy hat, which is actually from Australia, but it would be quite fitting for folks here to wear something like this. And you might notice that I have what we would call a t-shirt, because it's quite warm weather here still yet. I know you may be getting cold there in the Netherlands,
yeah,
but
we're jealous.
Zero?
We jealous.
Jealous, got it. All right. I didn't think it was down to zero yet, but
it's not yet, but it's coming.
It'll be coming. 0 centigrade, that is. And anyway, so I'm not going to wear the hat the whole time, but I wanted to give you a feel of the land here, of the culture here, which is a really awesome place. It's in Arizona, very close to the Mexican border. And it's also for me, a very shamanic land. I lived in San Francisco for about 22 years, which is what I call sex Mecca. And then I moved to Tucson after my neck injury when I became quadriplegic. And I call this shaman land. So anyway, it's interesting that my past ended up being, the training I give is called Path of the Sexual Shaman, because it sort of it represents some of the lifestyle I've lived for over 30 years now. So one thing I would suggest is that you turn your mic off, because we get lots of feedback. If you want to ask a question, just turn your mic back on, but in the meantime, go ahead and turn your mics off so we don't get lots of feedback, because Skype gets really crazy with that. All right, so I'm going to take my hat off here, but I just want to introduce you. I'm 69 years old, and some people say I'm sexy in this hat, so I want to get my best picture forward here. I think it's pretty sexy too. All right, so Tara asked me to talk on shamanism and Tantra. And that's a topic, those two topics together, or those topics individually and together, are something very much representing sort of my path since around 1973. 1973, I moved to San Francisco. I'd been in academia, left that, did my hippie trip, started hitchhiking around the United States, and ended up in San Francisco in 1973. And I call it the University of Life. And I had picked up a book on my way down to Mexico before I moved to San Francisco. Picked up a book on massage, which was written for the general population. Remember, these are the hippie days, and people were letting their hair hang down and really opening up to sexuality. And so I remember practicing massage on a beach down in Puerto Angel in Mexico, pretty far down in the state of Oaxaca. This woman from England, and said, well, this is fun. And I also saw the relationship between massage and sexuality. But I went to massage school, and massage school is really uptight about sexuality. Most massage professionals are extremely uptight. And I felt that that massage and sexuality should not be in opposite ends of each other. That for lovers, couples of all sexual orientations, could take the art of massage and apply that in their relationship. Seems like someone else wants to join in here. Just 1 second. And so I felt sexuality and massage were definitely could be related to enhance the relationship, to be a better lover, to be more sensitive, more caring, more present with a sexual partner. So I started teaching that. And when I started to do that, I began to, relate to or understand how sexuality can build up such a great intensity of energy. And so I had to learn how to, in a sense, how to relate to this energy in a way that was positive, because I wasn't modeling how to have an orgasm. People already pretty much knew how to do that. So when I was teaching massage for lovers, and including the genitals, it was about how do you relate to the genitals just like the back and the foot and the face with nurturing, caring touch. So anyway, I was learning how to relate to energy at the same time, and as I was teaching massage. Also, I started studying with the Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And Tibetan Buddhism is known as Vajrayana Buddhism. It's also known as Tantric Buddhism. And so my stepping into Tantra comes much more from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view. Although every Tibetan Buddhist I've ever talked to, I mean, Tibetan Lama, can everyone mute your mics, please? I'm hearing background sounds, which will be recorded. If you can just mute your mic for now, I'd be appreciated. If you need to say something, open it back up. So every Tibetan Buddhist lamas, at least the ones I've been around, have not been so open to talking about sexuality very much. So I had to start putting together this spirituality and erotic massage and meditation. And at the same time, I then started to teach at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco. And so I was putting together Western sexology, all at the same time. Within a matter of a few years, I was doing all of this because I was very, very deeply into my shamanic path. Oh, if I start to talk too rapidly, let me know. I get excited about this topic, and I will try to slow down so you perhaps will understand my words more clearly. And so I started to relate to all these different focuses, and also at the same time, in the mid-70s, Western Tantra began to become more popularized, especially in California, especially where I was living in the San Francisco area. And so I began to study Western Tantra, which really has an emphasis on sexuality. And of course, Tantra is much more than that, although often we think Tantra is only about sexuality. But that's only part of it all. So I was putting this all together, but the background in Tantra for me mainly came not from India, but from Tibet, Tibetan Buddhist. And I had to put the pieces together on my own because Tibetan Buddhist lamas weren't talking about sexuality. Well, at least not at the level I was studying at. Maybe they did at much higher levels of training or involvement in those traditions. But the level I was at, hardly ever talked about sexuality. So, over time, I came to a perspective of how to consider Tantra, which could embrace both Tantra from an India point of view, as well as a Buddhist Tibetan point of view, but also in some ways it would, in some ways, relate to the Taoist perspectives of sexuality that were all becoming popularized in the 1970s, at least in California. And so here's how I finally came to looking at Tantra, and I explain this in more detail in my book, The Essential Tantra, which is a book that really came out, I don't know how many years ago now, but it's one of my older books. And the way I like to think of Tantra is something that is not asceticism and is not hedonism. Asceticism is a term that's used to refer to a philosophy or an approach where the spiritual seeker, the practitioner on a spiritual path, denies himself or herself pleasure in general. The pleasure is the pitfall that will prevent you from being one with God, being spiritual, being holy. Or if you intensify the senses in a way that is painful, so that you are if you go through pain and suffering, then you might get God or great spirits' attention more. You're more deserving. So asceticism is either generally often referring to lack or no focus on sensations, or the painful suffering aspect of sensation. So that generally is not a very tantric perspective, generally. Because I've tried to look at all these different orientations around sexuality, or around tantra, I mean, that I've heard in different traditions, different teachings, and different teachers. Now, on the other end, we have what is known as hedonism, which some people think Tantra is. And it is, well, for some people that's what Tantra is, but for me, that would not really be Tantra. And that is, in hedonism, there is an indulgence of the senses. Thoroughly partaking in the pleasures of life, to the point where you have drunken orgies, and if you want to have drunken orgies, that's fine. But the extreme part of hedonism is that, just pleasure, 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 pleasure. Nothing else really matters. It's from an extreme point of view. And for me, Tantra, using the typical Buddhist conceptualization, the trick here, you find the two extremes, then you put whatever you're talking about in the middle, the middle path. I learned that from Buddhism a lot. So I sort of played that conceptualization. And so, in a sense, Tantra is in between the two. And Tantra, I think, mainly emphasizes a deep appreciation of the senses, being very conscious, being very aware, being very present. As a teenage boy, I had a chance to have sex. Well, let's go to it right now. As I got older and became more of a connoisseur of lovemaking, well, let's let this linger for a while. Let's build this energy. There's no rush. And so you begin to appreciate the senses and allowing one experience to unfold with the next experience without much of an agenda. And that, to me, was much more a representation of how we might apply Tantra in our everyday life. And of course, Tantra, different disciplines and different traditions will have very specific methodologies, certain types of breathing patterns, mudra, mantra, yantra, and what's the other? Mudra, mantra, asana, body position. So, some traditions get very, very strict. You can't do it this way, do it that way, do it this way, do it that way. You can't vary. But the point is that generally, I think the underlying philosophy that I have come away with thinking about Tantra overall is that it's a deep appreciation of the senses, so that we can partake in the senses, but not get lost in them. I mean, of course, the moment of sexual orgasm, yes, you're going to get lost. The moment of energetic orgasm, yes, you're going to get lost. But it's not about pursuing every day, every night. You've got to get lost in the wine and the orgy. Orgies are nice. I'm not putting down orgies, but getting lost is where we start to lose it, I feel. And this is where I really appreciate what in the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist background, is the mindfulness. very common word in Tibetan Buddhism, and Buddhism in general, mindfulness. Being present with your mind. You're sitting there in meditation for half an hour, observing your thoughts. Well, the Nyingmapa lineage Tibetan Buddhist Lama that I first studied with, he was focusing more on sensations, or what he called feeling tones, which are very subtle sensations. And so one of his main teachings was, whenever you have emotion, that's the best time to study, best time to meditate. Because when there's emotion, that means there's something going on. And so to sit there and with your awareness, your mindfulness, find the intensity of energy within you, the sensation, the vibratoriness, the feeling tones is the word he used, which is a very useful, very nice language in English. And be there with it. Don't necessarily act on what you're feeling, what you're emoting, your anger, your lust, whatever it is, but just go inside and be one with it. Place your awareness right in the center of whatever it is, whether it be pain or pleasure. Be in the center of it. Go right in to be very present. And so that's how I see most of Tantra. The real core, the essence of Tantra, is about being mindful of the sensory experiences. Now, I look at the sensory experiences not only as taste, smell, taste, tactile sensation, balance, and all this, the general things we call the five senses or something similar to them. And this is where I got much more, as I went deeper into sexuality, but also into shamanism, is there are a lot of very subtle sensations. An example of this would be, you may have heard about this place here in Arizona called Sedona. It is one of the New Age capitals of the world. Everybody has to go to Sedona. Well, I went to Sedona for the first time, and I went to one of those very important power spots that people had told me about. And I was aware of energy, so I wasn't novice to the idea of energy. And and I tuned into things there, and I thought, this is very beautiful, beautiful land, very beautiful rock formation, very beautiful color of the sand and the rock. But where's the energy? I didn't feel anything. I just didn't feel anything. I came back. Now, I've been doing body work, and I can feel energy in people's bodies. I came back about 3 years later. In the meantime, I had begun to focus more on a shamanic path and focus on going to power spots and land energies and sort of tuning to the earth energies. And it was a very different experience than tuning into human body energies like in my massage or teaching erotic massage. And it was a whole different wavelength, a different type of vibration that was going on. So I had to start, in effect, learning how to perceive in a more expansive way. We all have the potentiality of perceiving what I'll call land energy or earth energy. And after dancing with this, playing with this for a few years, I happened to go back to Sedona, and then I knew what people were talking about. I could feel the land energy. I could walk down a path to one of these power spots, and I'd walk through this wall of energy. So, wow. I turn around and walk back through. Yeah, it's there. Turn around and walk through again. Yeah, it's there. Then I asked some people as they came by, do you feel that? No. So, but it was really clear to me that there was a wall of energy there. And so I started tuning into that more and more. And then, now we're going back to sexuality. If we start to approach a lover of mindfulness of the energies in his or her energy field and body, as well as my own, then we start to look at a different dance of sexual attraction. Or, excuse me, not different, perhaps an expanded dance. So, to me, in many ways, Tantra and various forms of sacred sexuality that have been evolving in the West since the 70s and before that, are about really being mindful. And then as I studied the field of human sexuality and more about energy, I came up with this perspective that people think of our sexual nature in 4 different ways. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're very different. One of the predominant ways that people think of sexuality is by looking at procreation. Well, sex is about procreation, having more people on the planet, babies. And sexuality definitely is about that. And some religious traditions saying that's the only way we should relate to sexuality. But there's also another view of our sexual nature, and I call that romantic love. You could say companionship. You know, there's a song in English, falling in love with love is like falling in love with make-believe. You know, and I've often walked on the street before, but the pavement was always beneath my feet before. Now, all at once, I'm on the street where you live. The point is that love, love, love is, you know, love is awesome. I could fall in love every couple of weeks. And that love attraction of that nature often involves some sort of a sexual attraction, although it may not be acted out genitally. But generally what people call romance, romantic love, generally it involves some element of sexual attraction, unless they've suppressed their sexuality so much they don't even notice it. And it's quite possible for people to be asexual, I feel, and to have very powerful, meaningful, deep relationships without it having a sexual element to it. But generally when we have that romance and falling in love, you know, when falling in love happens, I figure I might as well go. I'm going to hit bottom sooner or later. I'll find reality, but damn, it feels good falling. It feels really good. So, anyway, a second view of looking at our sexual nature could be called romantic love. A third view of our sexual nature was popularized in the last 50, 60 years, a lot more. And I'm sure in different times of history, but I'm thinking about U.S. history right now. Because I was born in 1944. And the movies that I would be seeing is that, well, the husband and the wives slept in different beds when they would depict this in the movies. It was a big deal to have them in the same bed. And only, 10, 15 years later, I would have people having lots of sex in bed, called porno. Anyway, so there was a shift somewhere around the 60s and the 70s, at least in the U.S. culture, to looking at sexuality as sexual pleasure. What is sexual nature about? It's about having sexual pleasure. Not just pleasure, but sexual pleasure. And other pleasures with it, perhaps, too. So, procreation, romantic love, and sexual pleasure. But then, and like I said, in the 1970s, at least here, or at least in the West Coast, started to learn about this thing called Tantra. I started taking a class. I think the first class I took in Tantra was 1974, Western Tantra. And as I've been around different Western Tantra classes and different teachers, done readings here and there, readings of different writers and so forth, one of the things that I started to find a theme that started to occur in my awareness, and this is what I call the fourth focus a fourth idea of our sexual nature. And I call it energy merging sex. Energy merging. Now, I think that some of the there are two main methodologies that I've at least presented here in the United States. One is breathing in unison, and the other is left-eye gazing. They've been popularized. So what those are beginning to approach, in my perspective, is what I refer to as energy merging. Getting in sync with the other person's energy, which means a mindfulness of the subtle sensations. A mindfulness. And then as I stepped into more of a shamanic path, sometimes related to sexuality, but most of the time traditional Native American medicine people that I got to meet. There are a number of traditional Native American cultures here in Arizona where I live. You probably heard Navajo, Hopi. Another one that's not so well known, Tohono O'odham, Yaqui, Apache, are some of the more commonly well-known names of different Indian cultures. And fortunately, I got to meet some medicine people, or medicine men and medicine women, in some of these different cultures, and they were much more involved in their traditional culture, although they were clearly bicultural, meaning they were very much familiar with contemporary, modern-day, Western world, United States culture, but they were also very much involved in their own traditional culture. And many of these cultures had much more of a shamanic undertone or a flavor than I found in the culture that I grew up in. And so as I began to develop some abilities to read energies, read people's energetic structures and their patterns, I wouldn't call it psychic, but I would call it abilities to sense and then to conceptualize about what was happening in energies. I began to find some patterns among the different medicine people, some of whom I went to for my own healing, and some I went to for just to be in ceremony with, and some I got to know personally, just as a friendship way. And I began to observe that many of them had developed certain energetic structures that enable them to do certain things. And one of those main things is what I would call is energy merging. But it was occurring in a non-sexual context. Still the same phenomena of energy merging. And I'm going to define energy merging for you here, which I would have to describe a lot more to be able to really go into depth of what I mean by energy merging. But we all have our vibratory energetic patterns. Another person has his or her energetic vibratory patterns. In some ways similar, but also in some ways different. To merge with another person means that I continue to vibrate in my own energetic patterns, and I add on your energetic patterns as well. Now this is in contrast to what some people refer to as empath or empathic. And when I've talked to empath or empathic people and read their energies, what I begin to find was sort of a pattern is what happens is they have their own patterns, but then in a sense they stop or shut down their own patterns and take on the other person's patterns. That's very different than what I'm referring to as merging. I stay in my own patterns and I add on yours. Now quite how that happens, I'm not really clear, but the point is we can vibrate not only as ourselves, but as everything in the universe, or in existence, as we get more and more developed. Because remember, these Native American medicine people had developed, I was reading, some energetic structures that enable them to do that. Most people don't do that merging, or don't develop those structures, that enable them to do this energetic merging. But I want to try to make a real distinction here. It's not about stopping your own and taking on someone else's patterns. Rather, it's about you're staying exactly the way you are, and you add on, temporarily, the other person's patterns. And that's what I'm referring to as merging. Now, a lot of people who are in energy healing and so forth talk about that idea, use the word merging, but I find that most people are not doing, they may be doing something like that. There are many different ways that our energies interact with each other, but they're not doing what I would call merging. And I said this merging idea is something where I found a link between shamans and sacred sexuality or tantra. One, when you're doing this left eye gazing, breathing in unison, you're moving in direction of getting into sync with the other person. So it's moving in the direction of merging. But something that happens very spontaneously at the moment of orgasm, this is my observation, that when we have an orgasm and another person is in our energetic field, either skin to skin or a few inches away or maybe in a foot away or so, without trying to do anything, without any sort of shamanic development, we very naturally merge. There's a replicating of the other person's energy factors, energy patterns, in addition to our own, and we add it onto ourselves momentarily. My observation is for a shaman to do what shamans can do that other practitioners can't do who are not shamans, is they merge with the people in their ceremony or the people who are in the client or patient situation. They literally are themselves, but they also add on. Because this is very important from my understanding of shamanism, which is not the same perspective of a shaman, where a lot of people talk about shaman. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. A shaman might be a bone setter, maybe an herbalist, maybe a midwife, maybe a group ceremonialist, and he or she might do things externally. But over a period of time, I learned that I began to observe and understand that it was not those external behaviors that made them a shaman. Anybody can learn a certain ritual, facing the north, facing the south, calling the four directions, calling the four powers. And that's important. I mean, if you want to become a shaman, you better practice these ceremonies or something similar to them, because it's very helpful to start thinking, being mindful of how to relate to all of existence. Earth, wind, water, fire, plants, animal, crystals, humans, all that type of thing. I'm simplifying that very quickly right now. But that ain't it. That is not what makes a shaman a shaman. A shaman has developed, from my observation, mainly of traditional shamans, and not all traditional shamans, or people who call themselves shamans or being called shamans, fit this, but many of them do. It's what they've done. They have developed energetic structures so they're able to vibrate at these, I call them higher frequencies, and replicate another person's vibratory energetic pattern. And so they become one energetic system, in effect. So that if you and I merge, my knowledge base and your knowledge base become a combined knowledge base. If you and I merge, your energetic toolkit and my energetic toolkit become combined. You have a hammer, I have a saw. When we merge, I have a hammer and a saw, you have a hammer and a saw. And that enables then the, quote, receiving person, which is not necessarily receiving, but the person is not the shaman, to now have tools available to himself or herself to transform, to heal themselves. And that to me is the essence of what a shaman is. But if you do not merge with the other person, that knowledge base and toolkits and intensity of energy are not combined. Some people send their energy, and over time you're going to wear yourself out because you're giving away your energy, so to speak. And that's okay for people to do, but if you're going to be doing very powerful transformative ceremony, it's going to take a lot more energy, and it's not very wise to be just giving it out. Because when you merge with another person and you're functioning what I call interdimensionally, you're both bringing in more intensity of energy. That's because you develop certain energetic structures that enable you to do that. What happens in orgasm? Sexual orgasm? You bring in more of the same energy. So I kept finding these similarities between lovemaking and particularly orgasm happening very naturally and traditional shamans. However, traditional shamans were not having sex with the people. I mean, they weren't fucking their brains out. And that's okay if they choose to do that, but I'm simply saying that was usually not the methodology that at least most of us hear about. I'm not saying it can't be a method, because there could be methodology that involves sexual intercourse, for example. But in most situations, that probably is not happening. I'm saying that because, when the Western world came in with this heavy-duty Catholicism into South, Central America and the United States, with coming in from the Puritans, sex was sin. Same sex was abominable sin. And so the conquering cultures came in and obliterated any sort of sex-positive elements in a lot of the cultures that were already existing here in the North, Central, and South Americas. And so many native people learn not to talk about sex because they might feed you to the dogs. So to whatever extent that traditional shamanism may have embraced sexuality, we know very little about. And there's some indication that may have been included. But the point is that you don't have to have sex to have this increase in energy and in merging. And this is where I begin to find shamanism and sexuality and in Tantra. Because remember, you need to be present. If you're doing ceremony, whether it be Tantric ceremony, Taoist ceremony, shamanic ceremony, basically you need to be present. Now, some people talk about going into trance, and that's a different perspective, but it's going deeply into mindfulness, but then it becomes a different situation. And at least for me personally, the shamans I've been around were not going into trance. That is a legitimate methodology within different shamanic traditions, but what I'm talking about is mainly being very mindful and very present. There is a great documentary called The Horse Boy. I highly recommend it. It's where the Western world meets the contemporary traditional shamanic world. In Texas, there was an autistic child, and his parents were pretty hip, pretty wise. I'm keeping the story very short, decided to take him to Mongolia because they found this autistic child was much more responsive and calm and verbal when the child was on the back of a horse, a neighbor's horse. And so they took the child to Mongolia because it's a culture that had been involved in horse domestication for 6,000 years, I believe it said in the documentary. And shamanism is a very much embraced, formally accepted religious tradition in the Mongolian culture by the state of Mongolia. So there they meet with a group of shamans at the beginning, which are rather developed, but then at the very end they meet with a shaman who is highly developed. And if you watch the documentary, you'll see there's a major change in the child's expression and behavior. So, and these are traditional shamans, and I didn't really see anybody really going into what I would call trance, although maybe trance-like states to some extent. So thinking in terms of shamanism as a trance is, I think, is too limiting. And this brings me, I'll be stopping here in a few minutes, brings me to a perspective. There's a very famous book, one of the first books out on shamanism, is entitled Shamanism, and it's called Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. And that was written by, I always have to look at his name because I can never remember how to pronounce it. It's from an Eastern European culture, Mircea Eliade. I think that's approximately how it's pronounced. And he wrote it, I think, sometime in the 30s in another language. Eventually came into English somewhere in the 50s or 60s. And he defines shamanism as techniques of ecstasy. That is so far from my experience of traditional Native American medicine people. So I had to reject that. And I've come up with a different perspective of shamanism, where the idea here is that a shaman develops certain energetic structures so that he or she can function in faster and faster frequencies, or excuse me, higher and higher frequencies of other dimensions. And in so doing, then affecting the underlying energetic patterns in this incarnated hard matter, dense matter dimension, because it's affecting things at a much more primordial level. And that is how traditional shaman really makes a difference that most contemporary practitioners, whether it be Reiki, massage, Tantra teachers, psychotherapists, physicians, I very rarely find people who develop these structures and functioning what I would call interdimensionally, and I don't mean trance now, but function interdimensionally, whereby they're able to have more impact in some situations than these other modern technologies. By modern technologies, I mean what we're doing today. And I think both the general patterns of technologies are very important, because certain things about Western medicine, contemporary medicine, can do certain things that shamans can't do. Someone has a heart attack, it's probably, you want to go to the emergency room rather than try to find a local shaman. I may be wrong in that, but if you got the option, I would choose emergency room, for example. That's is best. I mean, that's a quick summation there. Because I think different types of methodologies have different benefits and different impacts. So, I don't think of shamanism as a technique of ecstasy. Rather, it's about techniques of transformation. Transformation. And I define transformation as a change in the underlying structure or functioning of a structure. An example of this, well, by that, well, first of all, let me say, by that I mean A shaman is not so involved in changing a behavior or an attitude or a belief, but rather about making a change in the underlying vibratory energetic patterns. And my stereotypical example is a person who's a wino or alcoholic drifts into a religious center one day where they're giving free food, and he or she, give an American example, finds Jesus and stops drinking alcohol and starts being very much involved in this religious tradition. But what happens for some people, it seems to me, is they're no longer drinking wine out of the bottle, they're drinking a belief, they're drinking Jesus out of the bottle. Now, this is not an anti-Christian perspective, it's simply the culture I grew up in. I've seen that happen a great deal. So, if you just change the behavior, or just the attitude, or the belief, and there's no underlying change, you're still an alcoholic. You substitute one substance for another substance. And one could really have, could become a follower of religious tradition in a very profound, transformative way. And that's totally fine. But simply changing the surface is not what I'm talking about. And shamans, by the very nature of what they do, without my explaining a whole lot, are able to facilitate this underlying energetic pattern, which then might result in a change in behavior, might result in a change in attitude or belief. So those are some of my perspectives here. I don't know, how many, do I have 5 more minutes or so here? Tara, how much more time do I have? I have about 10 more minutes, I think, from the time you first called. So I want to open up for questions here and reflections.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Following my clock, you still have 25 minutes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, so now.
And I think the people find it very interesting. Are the people tired? Do they want to have some air, like 5 minutes or pee?
I would prefer to go right on, personally.
Yeah, let's go on then.
Oh, yeah. Of course, I'm sitting here with a leg bag. I pee into a leg bag, so I don't have to worry about going to the bathroom. What? Pee? Me? I don't have to worry. I can pee in my leg bag anytime, day or night.
Okay.
One of the advantages of being quadriplegic.
Right, then we continue.
Yeah, we got the momentum. I'm hot. I'm hot. And I don't even have to put my hat on to be hot now. Anyway, does anyone have any reflections, comments? Well, let me say one other quick thing. If you want to learn about shamanism, do not read Carlos Castaneda. Do not read Carlos Castaneda. I did, and he really inspired me. A great writer, and it took me onto a shamanic path back in 1969. I used one of his books. I taught sociology at State University of New York, at the university. And as an additional reading, I used his book. It's called The Teachings of a Yaqui Way of Knowledge, The Teachings of Don Juan. I thought it was incredible. But then I kept reading the following books and said, wait a second, this is starting to sound like, bullshit to me. And so I quit reading him. And then as I look back later on, if you take the model presented by Carlos Castaneda, I think you will not understand shamanism. You definitely will not understand what I'm talking about. Because, I eventually read an interview. He came out with the Art of Dreaming over 10 years ago, many years after his first book. And somehow in an interview, he said that what he did for the earlier books, he would dream and go to dream state, asleep, wake up and write his dream. And while that may be a very symbolic, useful perspective, all I'm going to say is when I experienced Native American medicine people here, what he was talking about was bullshit. Spiritual bullshit. It's not being bullshit, but it's spiritual bullshit. So my perspective is Carlos Castaneda was a psychic, not a shaman. He was also an energy sucker, which is, you cannot be a shaman. He was only functioning in one dimension. He had very limited energetic abilities in a certain way and a lot of energetic abilities in other ways. So what Carlos Castaneda was talking about and what I'm talking about are different. So that's a point of view I have. And you're welcome to read Carlos Castaneda if you wish. Okay, questions, perspectives.
I have,
Go
I have
ahead.
one question.
Yes.
How to develop the merging of energy?
The way to develop these energetic structures is, in general, I would say you're involved in ceremonial practice of a certain alchemy, certain things. I find when I go to a Christian church and people do the Lord's Prayer, I don't feel much energy happening. But I go in Tibetan Buddhist mantras, there's a more energetic dynamic developed. And it's not about Christianity versus Buddhism, because I've spent time at Catholic monasteries and retreat and find it very meaningful. I think that over the thousands of years, different traditions, whether it be tantric or shamanism, by the way, Tantra, to me, is shamanic. The early roots of Tantra are very shamanic, from my point of view. But over the years, that people have discovered, because they are able to read energies, sense energies, because they're very, very wise intuitively, develop certain types of methodologies, certain meditative practices that, when followed, are more likely to help a person develop. Secondly, be with someone who's already energetically developed like that. Because if you, well, first of all, if he or she merges with you, which is going to be happening if it's a real shaman, and if you merge back with them, if you develop enough abilities to do the merging back, there's going to be a lot more happening. So I studied, well, I didn't study with. I went to see a Hopi. Hopi culture is been I don't know how long in the Americas, are for thousands of years at least. And there's a Hopi land area about 8 hours north of where I live. So I went up there to a healer because I was having a condition, and I thought I need to find something different. So I went up there because this person agreed to do a session, to use contemporary language. And he did something, and then he said, but his guides or his ancestors had directed him to do another ceremony with me. And I just totally spaced out when he did that ceremony. But that night, when I did my meditation, because I did a lot of meditation at that point in my life, I noticed something was different. Something was different. So what it was, it's sort of like more of a transmission. But you hear about the idea of transmission in Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Buddhism. Transmission to me is that the teacher is not giving you ideas, but rather by his or her merging with you, you now have a glimpse of what more development can look like, so to speak, and his or her abilities, knowledge base, intensity of energies become available to you. And so I simply learned that anytime I'm around a developed energetic person, a shaman, I just tune into them. I focus on them. And I talked to this Hopi person after I'd had that experience about, would he be willing to teach? He says, no. But every time I went to see him, he taught. I listened to what he said. He didn't sit down and do a lecture like I'm doing right here. He didn't explain anything. He didn't talk about Hopi culture. Once in a while he was talking about Hopi culture. But he would say little things here and there. So he would be teaching. But most importantly, I was tuning into his energy the whole time. He was teaching me through transmission, or anyone else. It's not just me. But by that time I developed some abilities, at least sort of, to merge with people. And that's one of the main ways I learned some energetic development was with a Tibetan Lama. Every 3 or 4 months I'd go up 2 hours north of here to Phoenix and spend a day with this Tibetan Lama who'd do ceremony or be doing a teaching of some kind. And he was highly energetically developed. And so being talking about sitting at the feet of a master, well, you don't have to sit at their feet and you don't have to revere them. You honor them, but you don't have to look up to them and worship them. But if you can learn to really tune in energetically. The Dalai Lama came to Tucson, gave 5 days of lecture. I don't know what he said, I kept zonking out. And it wasn't important, because that room was full of Tibetan Lamas, very highly developed, and I was getting overwhelmed with energy. So all I could do was keep my eyes open a little bit. So, one, I think if you do certain types of ceremonies, what those are can be really varied. And also, when people are more developed than you are, focus on being one with them energetically. I think those are the two main ways. In general, I mean, in general. Now, what ceremonies? Well, take my training, but there are ceremonies you're doing probably in your training there. And different traditions. There are many different ceremonies, different traditions. Just that it's like, but finding something that really works. And some traditions are much more shamanic than others. Does that sort of answer your question at least? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. So the question was how do you develop these shamanic abilities? Well, to answer the question, you do certain types of ceremonies and you get with people who are energetically developed and you focus and be with them. I don't mean 24/7 either, and you don't have to worship them. God, do not worship people. You are not inferior to other people, they're just more developed. God, man, I went into music. I love music, but I didn't have a voice like Aretha Franklin. And if I had a voice about as good as Aretha Franklin did, I would have said, "Watch out, Aretha. Watch out, baby, here I come." But I didn't have the talent she had. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Aretha Franklin is a very, very awesome singer, singing really great stuff in 1970s and 1965, 66, 67. Really incredible singer. Anyway, so I didn't have the talent, so that doesn't mean I can't enjoy singing. So you don't have to worship people, but you can appreciate them. Because if you get lost in worshiping something, this is another perspective I learned from Buddhism: attachment. You get attached to something, and you're not going to gain a whole lot from it. You'll just milk it dry. So appreciating, being one with it, and when it goes, it goes. It's easy to say. It is so easy to say. Great. All right. Tired? I have another 10 minutes? You got to keep me on board here. How many more minutes I have?
Sorry, I have to switch on my mic. You have 15 more minutes, right?
15? Well.
It's too much, then we stop.
No. It's not a problem. It just, I thought, usually I gab and I run way past my time. I was
No, you were very concise this time. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I love that.
Conciseness is not my...
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
You were talking that we have this kind of merging experience while we're having an orgasm.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Is that also a way to develop your structures or not?
I think it is. I think it's like this is a way for the average person to gain more intensity of energy. And it's not mean that you have to have 10 orgasms a day, but, well, I mean, when I was in college and high school, and, I wanted to have 10 orgasms a day. I was so horny. But it's not about having a lot of orgasms all the time. But the point is that the average person, where do you begin? One of the places to begin is embrace your sexuality. And when we embrace our sexuality, we're likely to have orgasms, though not necessarily. And there are other types of orgasms that are not sexual orgasms. People have energetic orgasms, what I call soul body orgasms, etc. There are other ways of having orgasm. And eventually, as you develop yourself in certain ways, you're in a constant state of orgasm. But it doesn't feel like an orgasm. You're just constantly bringing in more energy. And that's where the Dalai Lama is, and other people too. So you can bring in more energy. But how do you prime the pump? How do you get it started? And one of the ways to do that is embrace your sexuality. And this is a quote from Osho, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Although I've probably adapted it over time a little bit, so I'm not sure if I'm quoting him exactly. But I believe what he said at one point was that sex is the beginning, but it's not the end. If you miss the beginning, you might miss the end. The point is that sexuality is a way to start experiencing intensity of energy, start merging with another person, particularly in the state of orgasm, and also coming to know the other person vibrationally. Now, this is not cognitively knowing them, but we get things when we're in an orgasmic state and we've merged with another person. We have a deeper vibratory knowingness of that person. That's why we often call it intimacy. Now, sex can be done, while you're drunk, while you're not being very conscious, just getting your rocks off, not caring about the other person. But if you bring in this mindfulness, presence, ceremonial approach, you're more likely to go more deeply into that. So, the perspective, Tara, that I have is that sexuality is a very important place to begin, especially in the sense of orgasm. But it's not so much doing sex as embracing our sexual nature. And that may mean having lots of masturbation, lots of intercourse, with same sex, different sex, periods of time when you're celibate, but it's more about embracing our sexuality. And there are ways of having other types of orgasms that don't look like sexuality. Most of the things that are being in the tantric world, sacred sexuality world, that people do boom, that can be done with breath only. There are ways of not even trying to do breath, but you're just focusing, merging energetically, and energy gets so intense, you just boom. And this without any genital stimulation, without any even sexual arousal. So there are other ways of having orgasm that result in something similar to what we would think of it happening in a sexual orgasm, but the sensations and experiences and where they occur sometimes might be different. But I use orgasm in a more inclusive term than what we think of as a sexual orgasm, with pelvic, the Mash's and Johnson's definition of pelvic floor contractions. So sexuality, let's put it this way. If we have guilt, shame, or suppression around our sexuality, we are likely to suppress our energetic, spiritual, shamanic growth. Very, very likely. In many more ways than one. So it's not about saying, oh, Ray said, if I want to become enlightened, I need to have more sex. Well, have more sex if you want to. But if you don't want to, don't. It may not be your path. Celibacy is a valid option. There are other ways to bring in this energy without having orgasm. But it is the most common way for the 7 or 8 billion people on this planet to do. Because most people are not very energetically developed on this planet. It's by observation. And but again, embracing our sexuality, however we choose to do that, can be a very important psychological and emotional component to our development. And that's one of the reasons that Tantra in the West has been very valuable, even though it's really adapted and modified from some of the traditional Tantra from India or Tibet. But then again, any teaching is valuable has to adapt to the culture and the times. It's going to be different. We're in the iPad world. We don't, have the same type of ceremonies. We can, But we don't have the same type of ceremonies they have down in the Amazon. We have other types of ceremonies. And we have to carve out that type of a world. I mean, and so, okay, enough said about that. Did I answer your question, Tara?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Other question? Yeah, yes. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, thank you.
Carla, I mean.
Carla, yeah. I have a question. If you talk about energy, because I'm a biologist, can you explain energy in biological terms as far as you know it?
No, I cannot explain it in biological terms because I'm talking about something different than the way we think of biologically of energy. Here, I'll try to give you a quick, well, this is a long one. If I ever write this book called The Nature of Existence, I'll be going into this much more extensively. The most primordial thing, so to speak, in existence, I would call is frequency. Then this frequency can add on greater intensity. If you were to, if you have a point A to point B, I'm trying to keep my hand here so you can see it. All right, it says A, B. And you have so many waves, that'd be the frequency. But you go, and that, an amplitude, is sort of symbolic, represent intensity. From my understanding of energy, see, I thought once I discovered energy, energy, that's the most primordial thing in existence. And then I began to understand it in a different way. No, frequency is there more primordially, if I can use that language. But intensity is added on. And we can increase intensity of something many different ways. Now, I think of us as being a being. A being merges, becomes embodied with a fetus in utero. That organism is just an organized set of cells. When you have the birth and the umbilicus is eliminated or disconnected, then you still have life because the being, is a set of energetic structures, have become embodied, merged in a sense, with this organism. Otherwise, that organism will soon become dust. It would be, So life continues because not because the cells are doing what they're doing, but because there is I'm oversimplifying, because a being, which is a set of energetic structures, is merged with it. We call them chakras, kundalini. I call it light body, spirit body, soul body, more things than that. Now, for that being to continue on, it needs energy. The way that I'm talking about energy. But for the organism to continue, it's going to need proteins, carbohydrates, a number of nutrients, which are made up of energy the way I'm talking about it. So when we have a blood sugar drop and we have to, put in a candy bar, or what I do, I use a rye cracker with mayonnaise and chicken. Cures it all for me, man, on the spot. Whenever I have a drop in my energy, that's when I eat, and I feel good. I don't eat sugar, I couldn't handle it. Now that gives me nutrition. And I would almost want to relabel what biologists are talking about as nutritional energy. But the energy I'm talking about is more primordial. It literally originates in dimensions more intrinsic to us. And so that when the organism ceases to function, we call it death, and the being continues on, that being still needs energy. And it's not going to come through carbohydrates and proteins. So when I am saying energy, I'm really looking at more of this vibratory pattern with various degrees of intensity. But then what's happening in the cellular structure is it needs certain nutrients that we get through synthesis, and it feeds it, so to speak. And so the organism, this hard, dense matter body, continues on. So I think of energy as something more primordial than I think the way generally a biologist might think of that. And that's just the way, but it's relevant. But if I want to grow spiritually, I need the other type of energy. If I want to keep my liver in shape and feel like I can run more, be awake, I need to put those nutrients in too. And those nutrients have energy. But it's more the nutrient factor than the energy factor, the way that I'm using energy. Does that sort of help at all? I'm trying to recharacterize energy. Go ahead, yes.
I think if I mean energy, it's more like I mean electromagnetic currents from your brains and your heart. Heart rate variability, for instance. Mm-hmm. Because you talked about a horse boy. I work with horses with my clients, and horses do something with people. They definitely do something.
Yep.
And my theory is that these horses, they have a big heart, that their heart rate variability is influencing our human hearts. It must be something like that. That's my theory, so you can agree or disagree on that. So that's why I'm talking about energy more in electromagnetic currents radiating from your brain and from your heart, as the Institute of Heart Math, for instance, does a lot of studies on heart rate variability and brain waves in that matter, and how people influence each other through these electromagnetic currents.
Yes, I basically understand what you're saying, and my perspective is that if you didn't have that being with that other way of energy, this heart and brain would cease to function. But this heart and brain need the nutrients, but it's all that working together that you're now resulting in what we can perceive in Western science as some sort of matter doing stuff. But my perspective clearly is science, and even in many ways physics, does not understand the depth of energy. Because my perspective is there are 20 dimensions. And they're all intrinsic. And as a human being, we're functioning in only one of those dimensions. I use the word dimensions differently than what a lot of people do. It's not we're in the third dimension trying to get to the fifth dimension. That's another concept from my point of view. So I'm talking about ranges of frequencies. That this organism is vibrating at some of the lower frequencies. But the other dimensions, which is where shamans function, much higher frequencies that aren't even in this dimension. But they're all a part of this right now. I mean, you exist in all these, my concept, 20 dimensions. But most people are functioning, taking advantage of only one dimension. And the reason that a traditional shaman can do what he or she does, because I don't find a person shaman until they're functioning through at least the first 4 dimensions. At least the first 4. And there are very few people on this planet that are doing that, from my observation of reading of energy, of reading of energetic structures. So I am really talking about a different framework than Western science seems to be emphasizing. And that doesn't mean what you're saying is invalid, because there can be correlates. It's just that I'm saying that we can go in and affect it from other dimensions and have much more of an impact. And that's not to say at all that what you're talking about is invalid, but I would say it is much more than the heart organ or the brain organ, that it's coming from something more primordial and expressing this. Horses automatically function pretty much in the first and second dimension. They're more aware than we are, generally, in certain regards. You look at shamanic traditions, look at eagles, hawks, owls. They're functioning in more than one dimension. Those incarnations are such that they're able to handle functioning in higher dimensions than humans. Now, humans can develop this, but most humans are not born that way. We have to reinitiate it in every incarnation. So we're not talking about opposite things. I'm simply saying I would look at it from a even more basic primordial point of view. And that the brain and the heart are doing what they're doing because what's happening energetically from the way that I'm talking about it. So, and sometimes it's very hard to speak to scientists because it's outside. I'm talking about literally a different paradigm. It comes back to like, if we start doing the ceremonies that traditional shamans would do, we're a shaman? No. Most contemporary people who call themselves shamans do not fit my definition of shaman. They're doing the external form, and they may be doing meaningful things. I won't say it's not meaningful. They may be helping to transform people, but they're not functioning in these other dimensions like many of the traditional shamans are doing. And so I think, I found very few contemporary people who are actually functioning interdimensionally. And there are people who are not calling themselves shamans that are. Can't think of his name right now. Rachmaninoff, Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Alicia Keys, another artist. When I look at these people's energies, they don't like to. Carl Jung, Margaret Mead, Marie Curie, Madame Curie, I mean, Tesla, Einstein. These people I've just mentioned, most of them are functioning in all 20 dimensions, like the Dalai Lama, but differently. It's a different ballgame for them, because they're functioning very, very differently, and they still have to eat food. And they have to have healthy brain waves and a strong heart. Or once that organism dies, that's it. Till you reincarnate again, is my understanding. So so just please hear it as a paradigm point of view. And it's just a perspective here. I think I've probably gone over now. Have I, Tyra? I love talking about this stuff. Thank you for asking that question. And it's a very important question. And there's no final answer. It's just a point of view I'm presenting. Yes, Tara?
Are there any more important questions from students? Please go ahead and ask, because that will be the last one for today.
I'm not opposed to coming back again. I love talking this stuff, man. This feeds me. This is exciting. You know, this is I say in Spanish, mejor que sexo. It's better than sex sometimes. But then again, I'm 69 and quadriplegic, so my criteria are a little bit different, perhaps.
So, Carla, would it be a good idea to talk with Ray about energy and energetic aspects in depth another time, you and him separately?
Yeah, I would like that very much, because I'm intrigued.
Well, if you go to Vimeo, where I'm going to be placing this video at some point, if you go there, I have several commentaries on shamanism and tantra and sexuality. I've said a lot of it already, but in different ways. And it's called, if you go to Vimeo, oh God, if you look at shamanic transformation, you want to take it to my pages, and there are a number of video clips that and presentations like this, which, if you want to go through them, you might find them interesting, and maybe not. And also, what I said 2 years ago may be different than what I'm saying now, because I have a different understanding. Clearly I have a different understanding than 5 years ago.
Yeah, okay. I'll do so. I'll find your website. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Or actually, that's on Vimeo. I have a sexualshaman.com as my website. So, well, Tara, thank you so much. I enjoy rapping with these people who are going more deeply into the field of tantra, sexuality, energy, and I started in this path. I went to massage school in 1973. I just realized a few days ago that's 40 years. 40 years I've been. You know, when I went to massage school, that was the more the formal beginning of it. Actually, the beach down in Puerto Angel was probably the beginning, making love and after massage in the beach with the waves. That may have been the real beginning.
Ray, I thank you so much for sharing this all with us. We will see you again in the coming lectures in the coming months. And I just want to hug you and say I love you.
We'll do it energetically.
Yeah.
And in the future lectures, I'll be giving energetic ceremonies.
Okay.
And so this was a talk time. I only had 1 hour. Only 1 hour extended.
We will also merge with you.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, no, we're already merging. It's already been happening, but we'll formally do the ceremony focusing on merging.
Okay. Thank you so much. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, folks. Or night. Bye-bye.